Driver's license testers. What's the worst thing a kid has done without batting an eye while taking the driving test? My dad was friends with a guy who worked for the registry giving the road test. His best story was of a kid who took his test while it was raining. He started driving without the windshield wipers on. The guy figured he was nervous, so tried to give him a break, saying, "It's raining pretty hard, huh?" The kid was white-knuckled on the steering wheel and just said, "Yeah." Again, trying to give the kid a break, he said, "Don't you think you should do something about that?" The kid said, "Yeah." Apparently, he didn't know where the wiper controls were, so he rolled down the driver's side window and stuck his head out. At that point, he stopped the test and failed him. Commenter. I remember on my test day, I got into my instructor's car on a nice sunny day, and I went to indicate as I started off from the curb. Cue me turning the windshield wipers on, then the indicator off, then the wipers off. It was a European car, and the wipers and indicators are swapped from my usual car. And because I only drove it once a week, I always got tripped up the first time in the week when I had to indicate. Luckily, I didn't actually move from my spot and was able to restart. Story 2. When I parallel parked, I hit the pole behind me, and the tester said, "It's fine. This should be an automatic fail, but I think that's a bit too harsh." Then I hit the pole in front of me head on. Did not pass. Commenter, not an examiner. I passed the test first time, 100%. Although when driving back into the car park of the transport department, I pulled in a little wonky, so I said, "Oh, it'll fix that for you," reversed back to straighten up. Another car started to pull out directly behind me, not noticing me, I guess. They were about to hit my car, so I stressed out and put the car in drive to move forward quickly, a little too quickly, and launched my car over the car space barrier thing. I wanted to cry then and there. He just said, "Okay, I'll meet you inside." I parked the car and sat there for a good minute, knowing that must have made me fail. As I walked inside, I saw all the instructors standing together with him, and they were all laughing at me. I passed though, so I was happy to laugh along, dying inside. Now I have a real fear of hitting those mini concrete barriers when I park. Story 3 wasn't a kid, my 80-year-old great-aunt. The tester kept telling her to speed up. After a few times, she said she can't see the speedometer, so she doesn't know how fast she is going. He made her pull over, and she did not receive a renewal. Added, "This is actually a very serious problem, at least in America. Your aunt seems to be the odd man out, as plenty of senior citizens have licenses, and absolutely should not. But no one wants to take their parents' car away and be responsible for the transportation. And no politician will get elected on the platform of taking old people's licenses away. But it needs to happen." Commenter. Not me, but my driving instructor said a student failed when they forgot to put the car in drive. Did pretty much everything else, but they were pressing on the gas and were confused as to why they weren't moving. Story 4. Last year, I was making a left turn at a light, and a car swerved into my lane and hit me. Turns out it was someone taking their driver's test. I'm not exactly sure how driver's test car insurance works, but the instructor told me we had to wait for the police and take details of everything. I'm guessing the driver did not pass. Commenter. Not the examiner, but I was involved. I was driving my regular vehicle into the parking lot of a CDL-only driver facility to renew my CDL. As I'm making a right into the lot from the public road, a semi-tractor trailer comes flying out of the parking lot into my right-of-way. I avoid by pulling off into the grass. The trailer continues onto the road, but crosses directly across into the parking lot opposite. I get off the grass, park properly, grab my things, and walk into the facility. I was right pissed off, but wasn't hit, so I wasn't going to go after the guy and cause a fight. About 3 minutes later, a driver examiner walks in screaming about this idiot who is never getting his Class A as long as she lives. And Westcourt brought him here better not ever. Let him try again. And needs to go across the street to collect the vehicle, and the sorry excuse for a driver. Yeah, nearly got taken out by a newbie truck driver. I wonder if he ever did pass, or if she truly was able to permaban him. Story 5. The kids make minor mistakes. And yes, some do make scary mistakes. However, it's the adults that scare me most, especially the seniors who are up for re-exam. Probably the worst test I've ever been on was this man in his 98S. I instructed him to turn onto a street when it is safe to do so, and he turned, narrowly missing a pedestrian. Not only that, but he was driving on the wrong side of the road. He came head-to-head with another car who pulled over to let him go. He was laughing about it because he was under the impression that it was a one-way road. When I got back to the office with him, I cut the test short and got him back in the quickest and safest way possible. He was astounded when I told him it was not a one-way street. Me, did you see any one-way signs? Him, no, but I assumed you were going to take me on one. Story 6. My best friend's son just failed because he went the wrong way down a busy 4-lane road. Luckily, they made it safely into a parking lot, and the testing administrator drove them back. Commenter. Not an examiner, but my tester told me something I'll never forget. He was driving with a girl and testing her. Here in AZ, and probably everywhere in the US, the examiner is not allowed to say anything that isn't a direction, i.e. turn left. Of course, this doesn't work if the driver is a little slow. During the test, she pulls up to a stop sign. She's the first one there, but another car pulls up to the left. She waves them on. Not entirely wrong, but she should have gone first. Not a huge deal. Then it happens again. Mind you, she hasn't moved through the intersection. Rather, another car has approached, stopped, and been waved on. There are now 1 or 2 cars behind her. Eventually, there's a large backup of honking traffic and a small trickle of cars crossing through the intersection in front of her. She finally turns to the instructor and says, "Why are they all mad at me? I have a red light." And that's the story of how a small point deduction failed someone's driving test. Story 7. My dad did testing for a few years, and he once had a girl stop on railroad tracks. There was a train coming, slowly, but still it takes them a long time to stop, and it blasted the horn right into the car, passenger side, with the window open. This just made her freeze up even more. He had to reach his foot over to her side to hit the accelerator. Story 8. Took a test with a girl who drove on the wrong side of the road and took a left turn into oncoming traffic, all in the same drive. It was through my school, and she was banned from taking it through the school because of that. Story 9. Opposite kind of story here. When I was taking driver's ed, I was in a car that had the brake on the passenger side for the instructor to use just in case. Going 35 down fairly busy street, my car all of a sudden comes to a complete stop. In horror, I look over at my instructor, who is sound asleep with his foot on the brake. I just sat there dumbfounded. After a couple people honked real quick, he shook himself awake, mumbled a quick accelerate, and sat up adjusting his glasses. So that was fun. Story 10. My driver's ed teacher said that one kid reclined his seat all the way back, put one foot on the gas and the other on the brake, and grabbed the top of the wheel with one hand and said, "Let's go." Story 11. I'm not a tester, but I asked my tester during my full license test what was the worst thing someone had done. Apparently, there was an older gentleman who drove through 3 stop signs before the tester told him to pull over. The gentleman explained that he didn't want the license, but his family was pressuring him, so ran the signs on purpose to fail, made sure no cars were coming first. Commenter. Okay, not a driving test instructor, but this happened during my test. I had just gotten a little Hyundai as my first car to take my test in as my mom drove a massive SUV. We hadn't driven it much or anything, but we decided that it would suffice. We had to drive about 45 minutes to the testing facility as we lived out in the middle of nowhere. So here I am, 16, nervous as hell, in this new car that we just got, on roads I didn't recognize. My instructor had me drive on an old country road where the speed limit was 55 miles per hour, the fastest I'd ever driven. All was going well until I noticed smoke billowing out of driver wheel well. My car was on fire. Something had bounced up into my tires and burst into flames. After the whole ordeal was over, the instructor passed me despite not completing the maneuverability part of the exam. Cool thing was that the car was totaled due to the fire, and I ended up getting another, way better, non-exploding vehicle. Story 12. My best friend was coming to a 4-way stop sign in our small rural town. The tester said to go straight, so she did, without stopping at the sign. Just drove right through without batting an eye. He basically told her, "Well, you failed if you want to just drive back." Story 13. Okay, 3 stories. My ex drove a geo-tracker, tiny asterisk car. She pulled right into the parallel parking area and fit in so unbelievably easy, the tester made her do it properly. A girl in my driver's ed failed her test when she went to DMV because she turned into oncoming traffic. Not only was there a grass median, there was some of those skinny red-white poles for about 10 feet, followed by a guardrail. Each side of the median was 3 lanes. There really was no way to miss it, but she did. On a lighter note, I did the backing up 100 feet when the tester told me when. I stopped, and before I put it into park, he asked me a few verbal questions, then proceeded to give me directions to leave the area and back to the parking lot where the parallel parking test would be done. Never put the car in drive, pressed the gas, and car went flying in reverse for about 20 feet. He apologized and said, "My fault for distracting you." As far as I'm concerned, that never happened. Story 14. While I was waiting for my turn to do my CDL test, I watched a guy in a semi back into a light pole, and instead of seeing what he gently backed into, gassed it and knocked it over. Needless to say, I didn't get to take my test for an hour or so while they cleaned it up. Story 15. I was the kid, and full transparency. It was a learning drive, not the test. We had to do 6 scheduled drives with our instructor and had a partner. One would drive for 30 minutes, then you would stop and switch so the other could drive back. The rule when you got in the car, just so it wasn't a constant game of should I turn, was that you always go straight until the instructor tells you to turn. So one Saturday we had a very early drive scheduled. We met up at the school, and I was the first to drive. We got about 5 minutes in, turned onto a main road, and the instructor quickly fell asleep. My partner and I quietly, with a smirk, agreed that we would still follow the rules. We took the road for about an hour and 15 minutes until it dead-ended and you had to turn. I pulled over in a parking lot and we woke up the instructor to ask him which way to turn. It took a good 30 seconds for him to realize what had happened and where we were. He yelled at us both to get in the back seat, and we witnessed some very unsafe ways to drive as we headed back towards the school. And I didn't bat an eye. Commenter, I had one instructor fall asleep on me and I just drove around for an hour and drove back to the school to wake him up. Another instructor had me drive to his mom's house. She made us lunch and then we just went back to the school. Story 16. In my local area, a guy in his mid-20s failed the test for some reason. At this point in time, the results of the test were shared in the car. After being told he failed, he proceeded to get out of the car and grab an axe out of the trunk. I don't know any more details beyond that, but apparently it is why the results are shared inside the licensing building rather than in the car. Commenter. Not an examiner, one of my friends had a pretty brutal mistake. We live in Wisconsin, and she took her test on a day where there was a bit of snow. Started the road portion of the test, pulling up to a red light with a pedestrian crossing in the crosswalk. My friend started braking way too late. When she hit the brakes, the wheels just locked up and she slid into the pedestrian, knocking them up onto her hood and breaking the pedestrian's leg. She failed the test 4 more times after that, but now uses the road just like anyone else. I refuse to ever ride in her car. Story 17. This reminded me of a moment I had during my final test. The tester had an arm injury and was wearing a brace on his right arm. I took a left turn way too hard and caused him to accidentally hit his arm against the door. I was just like, oh srap, I'm so sorry. Surprisingly, he passed me that day. Maybe he didn't want me to come back. Story 18. When I went to take mine, the tester waited till I was at an intersection and then yelled, "Turn left." She scared me, so I did and failed. When I went back to try again, she was just ripping into this girl and her mom in the parking lot. I was like, at least I'll get a different tester because she's clearly busy. Commentaire. During my test, there was a stop sign before entering the course. The instructor just told me to drive forward and looked at me. Needless to say, I stopped at the sign, looked both ways before entering. I feel like it was a trick to see who would not stop. I wonder how many people failed because they just drove into the course without stopping. Story 19. As someone who worked in a DMV for many years issuing driver's licenses, even though I wasn't a license examiner, I think I'm the closest thing to your target respondent so far. The craziest thing I ever witnessed with my own eyes was a dude who somehow managed to lose control at 15 miles per hour, jumped the curb, and smashed into the guardrail. Needless to say, he was not issued a license. The best story I ever heard from a coworker happened immediately after she came inside swearing a blue streak, because during a part of the test where the examiner stands on the curb in order to observe maneuvers, her customer drove up over the curb and straight into her knee. Story 20. Not a tester, but there was a license center next to the sporting goods store I worked at. A lot of people would come there and practice before their test out front in the straight-on parking spots. A young lady, who only had her permit, managed to mix up the gas and brake and drove right through the front of the license center. I was told later that she was even more upset when they wouldn't let her reschedule her test for the following day since they canceled her test. She was pulling in to take when she wrecked the whole front of the building. It wasn't long after that, they installed a bunch of bollards in front to protect the building. I was amazed at how marked up they had gotten in the first few months. Story 21. Not a tester, but I heard about a girl in driver's ed who was driving on the interstate with the teacher and 3 other students. The teacher commented that they missed the exit, but they would just get off on the next one. I'm not sure what the girl's thought process was, but this girl pulled into the grass and tried to go against the traffic to go back to their missed exit. The teacher had to use her brake on the passenger side while the 3 other students screamed bloody murder. Commenter. One of my kids has his driver's test this coming Wednesday, so I've been taking him out driving a bit. And his sister was learning a few years ago. I told them both about what to do you miss your turn. You don't stop, you don't swerve. There will be a way to come back. You look for the first easy and legal stop, and you pull off and figure it out. Or you take the next exit or turn at the next street, even if it's a long ways. That was actually my biggest fear for them, that they'd do something sudden like this. Story 22. Not a tester, but I watched my, at the time, know-it-all son do the California roll through 3 consecutive stop signs as he was exiting the courthouse parking lot at the beginning of the test. The tester stopped the test and failed him on the spot before he even got out of the parking lot. My son's excuse. I thought the test hadn't started yet. Story 23. My father used to tell stories of when his dad worked at the Massachusetts registry. One story, and I'll change names because internet, he told was there was this kid taking a test who was awful, but the kid was really stuck up. Somehow he had gotten my grandfather's name, so after the kid tries to act all slick and pull strings and goes, "I know Chuck Lafitte," my grandfather giving the test says, "Oh really? You know Chuck Lafitte?" Kid's like, "Yep, no you don't, because *** Chuck Lafitte." Kid did not get a license that day. Story 24. While taking our CDL test, I was sitting in the sleeper area, and the guy actually taking the test ground gears when shifting, he immediately let go of the steering wheel, causing the proctor to have to grab the steering wheel and drive for the 5 or so seconds it took for him to recompose himself. Story 25. Several in one day, actually. I wasn't the tester, but I was waiting in line to get my test with about 30 other people. 1. The car they were trying to use didn't have valid registration or inspection. Automatic fail. 2. The car had no brake lights. Automatic fail. 3. The insurance was expired in the car. 4. Put it in reverse instead of drive. Nearly backed into the car behind them, but didn't. Automatic fail. 5. Ran over the parallel parking cone completely. Automatic fail. 6. Hit the curb, turning left out of the lot somehow. Automatic fail. These were 6 different people who went before me. It was beyond frustrating. I waited over an hour for 6 out of the 10 people in front of me to not even make it out of the parking lot. Story 26. When I was sitting my test, I asked the tester how many tests he did in a normal day. His answer was 10. Not all that surprising, until he followed it up with 10 and 8 will fail before making it out of the car park. I asked him to elaborate, and apparently the vast majority of test sitters will fail for administrative reasons, like arriving late to the test, not bringing their existing learner's licenses, or having a vehicle that wasn't road legal. The latter was more common than it sounds, when all lights, turns, signals, horn, etc. are tested in the car park before the test itself begins. Fail any of the above and you've wasted your $75 and never even got into gear. Story 27. Kind of the opposite of your question. Actually, the worst thing a tester could do. Gets in car, a little hatchback. He's a huge man and cannot fit. Says he will fail me unless I can get a car he could fit into. Within 15 minutes, otherwise my slot will be gone and I will have to rebook and pay again. Luckily, Dad was 5 minutes away who came with his sedan. Disaster averted, or so I thought. Asks me to do a U-turn on a farm road. Single lane each side, with a ditch on either side. Impossible to do based on turning circle of car. I attempted the largest angle possible, but due to ditch, each side ends up being a 3-point turn. He asks me if I'm deaf and if I know what a U-turn is. Politely try to explain it's not possible, which I'm sure he knew. Completed the test and passed everything else. Failed me and told me to come back when I learned to drive. Rebooked the next day and passed with a different instructor. This was in 2005. Fast forward 15 years. He is actually in the news and sentenced to jail for accepted bribes. In hindsight, he made a comment of some sort of reparation for not fitting in the car, and it makes sense now. Story 28. My old driving instructor told me about a kid that pulled into the drive-thru at McDonald's, ordered some food, then realized he left his wallet in his other car, was using the instructor's car. He wanted the instructor to pay for his food and said he'd offer half of his fries in return. The wallet also contained his license, so the instructor failed him on the spot and told him to get out the car. Story 29. First time I took the driving test, having never parallel parked before because I live in the suburbs, I tried it and was like 3 feet from the curb. Second time, I back into the space perfectly. Instructor says, okay, just pull forward a foot and you're good. Excited that I did it. I never put it in drive and reversed over the cones. Third time, it was pouring rain. I drove the exact speed limit. Afterwards, he told me I was driving too fast in the rain, but passed me anyway. Story 30. When I went to take mine, the DMV was across the highway from the truck stop. I made a right turn onto the highway to go get on the interstate. Right after I turned onto the highway, a semi turned left onto the highway, but he went across 4 lanes into my lane. My tester got silent. I had seen what he was doing and had slowed down and pulled over to the shoulder and then into a driveway until the semi passed us. When it was all clear, I signaled and pulled back onto the highway, then onto the interstate behind the semi. My tester told me to turn around at the next exit. I had passed. Story 31. Not an instructor, but in high school, the instructor had me drive around doing his chores. I had to drive to Blockbuster so he could drop off his videos, to Dunkin' Donuts drive-through, and to check out a house he was eyeing to buy. Story 32. I guess I sort of fit the criteria. Prior military and after being certified for a long time in the Coast Guard as a truck and trailer driver for transporting small boats to boat launch ramps, I would take new guys out to practice driving with the trailer, working the hitch, basic maintenance, hand signals for spotters, making sure they don't jackknife the damn thing in reverse, and backing the boat trailer up into a garage boat ramp. Young kid just out of boot camp was with me for the day while we drove down to a ramp to offload boat and crew to work a few ranges, water lights, for the day. It was the kid's final sign-off, and he was to take the empty trailer and boat back to base alone after I joined the crew on the water. He'd driven with me as passenger successfully many times by this point and had all his sign-offs done and was endorsed by command to be rewarded his driver letter. Cut to several hours later, and our boat is mooring up at the base pier and no new guy and truck in sight. That's weird. So I call the kid and try and find out where he was. Long story short, on the way home he stopped off at an ice rink to duck around and have fun, but parked illegally in a handicapped spot. The government vehicle got towed, but instead of calling us, he got an Uber home, turned off his phone, and hid in his barracks room. Had to get command to negotiate with the city to get the truck out of impound and the bean counters over at command. The federal auditors over with government vehicle procurement were not happy. He did not get his certification. Story 33. I failed my first test by taking the wrong turn at a stoplight. Not an illegal one, and when I got us back to the MDV, the tester said I drove beautifully, and I would have passed with flying colors, including pulling over properly to allow an ambulance to pass, had I not taken a wrong turn off the course. Came back the next day and nailed it. Story 34? On my wife's first attempt, she didn't even make it out of the parking spot. The instructors asked her about the headlights, and her response was, "Aren't they automatic?" Story 35? I remember my driver's test very clearly. First of all, I was a smart, overly arrogant little. I procrastinated and never got my learner's permit until I was like 4 months away from turning 16. This meant I could only get my license 2 months after turning 16 because you were required to have your permit for 6 months before you can get your license in my state. So anyway, finally waited out the 6 months and felt like I knew what I was doing. I had to take the test in my dad's Cadillac DeVille, an enormous boat of a car. Part of the test was a 3-point turn. I aced it, or so I thought. Also, part of the test was slamming on the brakes. I ducking aced that crap too, I thought. Then he asked me to stop at a stop sign. Boom. Simple. Then the test was pretty much over and he asked me to park and I pulled right into the spot. The tester spent what seemed like forever adding crap up on his sheet and he was like, "Well, you passed. You can go in and get your license." Being the little I was like, was there anything I did wrong? Fully expecting him to tell me how great a driver I was. He was like, "Well, at the beginning of the test, you started backing out of the spot before looking. You eventually did look, but you would have run over someone if they were standing directly behind your car. Once you pulled out of the parking lot, you hit the accelerator hard and had to correct your steering to stay in the lane fast enough that you would have lost control of the car if it was raining. Your 3-point turn was accomplished, but not done safely since you were not looking both ways. Also, you pulled too far forward and too far backward, much more so than you needed. And your hands were on the wheel, but I was not confident you had a good grip on the wheel when it mattered most. You stopped at the stop sign, and you were behind the white line, but you failed to approach slowly after moving forward after the stop. Your right turns were close to cutting the curb. Your left turns were much too early. When you tested fast braking, you let go of the brake pedal and hit it again, which increased braking distance. You basically barely passed. I hope you become a better driver after this. I went from being a banana little duck to feeling like I was barely cutting it. Seriously. It made me put effort into driving. Total wake-up call. I swear I'm a good driver today, age 37, partly because of him pointing out all the nuances I missed with my inexperience. Story 36. I am a driver's license tester. It's just one of the many roles at my job. We test on a course, so there really isn't that much room for insane mess-ups. I go over everything before the exam just to refresh their memory because of nerves. I walk through the whole test, and the second we go out the door, it all disappears. I had one kid back into a car when we were leaving the spot to start the test. Didn't understand why he failed because the car wasn't on the course. Our parking section has cones to simulate cars. I've had kids plow over the cones, run them over, back over them, and continue on thinking they are doing well. The only people I have had drive on the wrong side of the road are people from different countries who are used to driving on that side and then realize it a few seconds later with an "oh crap" look. Nothing too insane. Story 37. When I was 17, I lived in Ohio and went in for my driver's test to obtain my license. Where I lived, the state patrol officer was the one who rode along with you and administered the test. It was intimidating to have a state patrol officer riding along with you. I passed my test with only one minor mistake. The blunder part comes while I was waiting for them to print out my card. The office was very busy that day and definitely near capacity. Not a chair was empty. While I sat there, another kid came in from his test, his head hanging low. A patrol officer followed him in with a gruff look on his face. This officer had to be 6'5" and a mountain of a man. The boy walked over to his father and was explaining that he had failed his test. The father lost his mind and walked over to the officer. He then proceeded to put his finger in the officer's face and yell at him. At this point, the entire room went silent and watched. "How dare you fail my son? He's a good driver. Turning left into a turn lane and merging into traffic is not illegal. It is in that part of Ohio BTW." The officer smirked and looked around, knowing everyone was watching this now. He then said loudly enough for the whole room to hear, "Sir, it is illegal and I can show you where in the book it states that." He then pulled out the driving laws book and showed him. "But sir, that is not the reason I failed your son. He failed because he was doing 45 in a school zone." The entire room began to snicker. The father quickly grabbed his son and ran out. Story 38. I should have technically failed mine, as when I did my turn across the oncoming lane, a car was reasonably close coming towards us. We get back to the registry, and the tester says, "I could have failed you there, but it was raining. There was dark low cloud, and it was a black car without its lights on coming over the crest of a hill, so I gave you the benefit of the doubt." Well, fantastic, I think. So that afternoon, I go for my first solo drive, and as I'm pulling into a shopping mall, I completely miss a pedestrian crossing sign and nearly run someone down. I slam on the brakes at the last second and am apologizing profusely, and she's just staring at me. It was the woman who did my test. She just shook her head and walked off. Thanks for the benefit of the doubt, though. Story 39. I witnessed some girl from a different country, she barely spoke our language, fail the parking part of the exam. Basically, you had 6 things you could do, and 4 are required. We had to stop at a stop sign almost perfectly. Easy, because you can't get to speed. Then parallel parking, 3-point turn and parking in a normal parking space like you would find in every parking lot. The only requirement was that you don't touch any of the stuff used to corner the different parts. And you have 3 tries. When you touch something, you instantly lose. So this girl literally took apart the exam place. She even got a second try even though the law forbid it. Her father was livid that the examiner wouldn't let her pass and tried to fight him. In the end, he paid for the damages and drove his daughter home. Story 40. A good friend of mine worked the DMV for almost 50 years and did a lot of the driver's tests. 2 crazy stories he told me I remember. Story 1. This Indian couple came in and the wife was testing to get her license. They were new American citizens, so they weren't totally used to the culture, and there was still a bit of language barrier going on. The DMV my friend worked at also happened to be near a busy train yard, so they get out on the road and the lady is doing fine. Nothing major wrong with her driving. My friend decides it's time to turn around and end the test, so he tells her to take a right up after the train crossing ahead. The lady pulls up to the train crossing, stops, looks both ways for a train, and then turns right onto the train tracks. My friend frantically tells her to stop the car and get out immediately. She does, and he jumps in the driver's seat and slams reverse, and right after he pulls the car away from the tracks. The train signal comes down to block the crossing, and a train comes through. Needless to say, she didn't pass. Story time 2. This was the event that actually ended his career and forced him to retire. He was testing a young girl who was just getting her license, and she was very nervous and shaky the whole time. She was making little mistakes here and there, swerving, not checking mirrors, not fully stopping, things like that. At this point, he decided she wasn't going to pass, so he asked her to go back to the office. On the way back, there was an area of road under construction with a bridge and 1 lane closed. The kind where they put up cement barricades that narrow the road much more than normal. The girl was shaking like crazy going through the tight space, and some combination of nerves, inexperience, and bad luck came together, and she ended up slamming the accelerator instead of braking, turning off into a work area downhill over the shoulder of the bridge and slamming into the back of a massive back escort. The bucket of the machine came through the windshield and smashed into my friend's head. He was in a coma for 2 days, broke his neck and shoulder, suffered mild permanent brain damage, and now has PTSD and won't be in a car when he isn't driving. The girl ended up unscathed, thankfully, but my friend says he's never been the same, not as sharp. Everything seems to take more effort now. He ended up winning a huge settlement and getting his pension early since he was close to retirement. And so he retired then and lives pretty comfortably now. Story 41. Not a tester, but I was in the backseat of the car when it happened. I'd just taken my 3rd and final driving test. Passed it without a hitch. No problem. However, the driving route was just going to another kid's house to pick her up. Pretty standard. So, as I pull up to the driveway, the driving instructor says, "Just be ready. She's never even sat in a driver's seat of a car before." I didn't think too much of it because my first time driving was with the instructor, and it went well. Anyway, we get in and start driving off. Not even 45 seconds later, we get to a stop sign. She doesn't stop, so the instructor slams on his brake in his footwell. She was confused as to why she was stopping, so she continued to press down on the accelerator harder, like to the floor. Lots of screaming telling her to stop. After about 15 seconds of that, she puts the car in park and blows the transmission. It was some 1980s Volvo, and the car was pretty much junked. It's funny. As we were driving, my instructor was telling me how he was surprised this car was still going. Had about 295k miles on it. Story 42. Heard this story from my driving instructor in high school. He was giving a kid a lesson, and they were on the highway. He asked the student to pass a car that was driving a little slow. The student signals, merges into the left lane, and gently accelerates. Everything is going well when suddenly the student exclaims, "Oh my, I'm sorry I forgot to shift the gear and to pass." The instructor is momentarily confused until it's too late, as the student reaches for the automatic gear shifter and throws it towards P, while traveling at 65 miles per hour. This wasn't good for the car. Story 43. Not a tester, but when I was in high school, there was a guy who was known for failing the driver's license test multiple times. The most notorious story was that one of the times he failed, it was because he fell asleep at the wheel * during the test. I and a couple of friends asked him directly if it was true. He was obviously embarrassed, but confirmed that it was true. He fell asleep at the wheel for a few seconds, with the DMV tester right next to him. We then asked how that was possible, as this is when most people are nervous. Still embarrassed, he mumbled something about being sleepy and hurried away from us. We let it drop, but never got a better answer out of him. Story 44. I got a story from when I was a beginner driver. My mom used to take me out to drive so I could get practice. I had my license, but was still green. On a certain crossroad, my mom sees someone cross ignoring the red light. Looking at them, she sardonically says, "Sure, this red signal doesn't apply. Let's just drive ahead." Being too focused on driving to notice the tone of voice and interpret this as something other than an instruction, I did exactly that. Drove straight past that red light. Good thing it was nighttime, so there was next to nobody on the road, but it was spooky after the fact. Story 45. My dad's a driver's ed teacher. Every week when we go eat lunch, he always has a story about how he almost died the previous week. Most of them involve the kids not knowing their left from their right, which is kind of understandable if you've never driven before and are nervous. But he says most of the time, it's kids trying to multitask, changing the radio or grabbing their phone. After a few months and a couple of near misses, he makes the student driver hand him their phone, and only he can mess with the radio. Some of these stories, the kids aren't even the problems. It's other drivers. The car had 4 giant magnetic stickers that say "Student Driver" in black and yellow font on the front, back, and sides of silver. Other drivers will get close and try to intimidate the kids by honking, revving up, or bass boosting their music. I've been driving for 18 years, and I know that still ducks with me. Who knows how the kids feel? In the first half of this year, he did have this terrible student driver story. The girl would just freeze up at random. He said this went on for 2 weeks before he had to just fail her out of the course. One time she popped a curb because there was a squirrel in the road. Then there was the time she almost ran a red light plowed right into a smart car. And my favorite, she forgot which pedal was the brake and which one was the gas. He said they sat there in the parking lot of the school for 10 minutes so she could remember. Story 46. I was a kid with a crafty tester. He wasn't even supposed to be a tester, but the normal person wasn't there for some reason, so I got stuck with him. He didn't know the path we were supposed to take super well and was telling me to turn as we were passing the turn. So of course, that led to some sharp, sudden turns on my part. At the end, he said I didn't do bad enough to fail, but he didn't feel confident passing me, which is some bullcrap. If I did everything right, I didn't fail. I came in like a week later and passed easily with the normal tester, but I'm still irritated about that crap to this day. Story 47. Not a tester, but my cousin went to get their license. They pulled out from the parking lot of the DMV, took both hands off the wheel to put down the visor to block the sun, and failed instantly. Story 48. Not a tester, but recently a buddy did this. I took a friend on the route that I had taken with that same DMV for my license, and the route that my SEAL had taken at same DMV. In return, my friend showed the buddy all 3 routes when he went for his license test. Because all 3 of ours went through the park and were very similar, with one side street difference, he figured he was going through the park. So without the license tester saying anything, Buddy pulls into park and goes through it. No blinker, and didn't drop his speed. Mind you, when you got on the main road, the speed limit is 35, then drops to 25. Such a busy road and so many signs you barely notice the 25, but obviously when on way to DMV Sill stressed to me, I stressed to friend and friend, supposedly stressed to Buddy. Then when you enter park, it's automatically 15, but it's a hill. Still 15, but much easier to go up it going faster. All in all, Buddy failed because of his reverse. License tester didn't write anything about park, just laughed and said we were funny for taking him the routes we went, especially since it was the same guy I did mine with. Story 49. Not a tester, but was in the car when this happened. Where I learned it, all the kids went in pairs to drive. One kid would drive an hour away, then the students would switch roles, and the other would drive back, all while the instructor helps and gives advice. I had finished my part of the driving and was sitting in the back, trying not to get carsick. I'd done this a couple times before with some other fellow classmates, but this one extraordinarily more bumpy than the others. We stop at a red light and the kid needs to turn left, so he turns on his signal, looks both ways, and begins his turn, while the light is still red, and there is barely a big enough gap in traffic to get through. The teacher stops him and asks what he's doing. He replies, "If you're turning right and the light is red and no one is coming, you can turn. Isn't it the same for turning left?" I'm not sure if he passed the class, but it was one of the most stressful drives in my life. Story 50. I'm not a driver's license tester, but when I was 16 and taking courses, a group of kids in my class convinced this really ditzy girl that the stop signs with a white border are optional. She ended up running 2 stop signs in her test and had to take the course again. I'm sure that was a pretty scary moment for the tester involved. Story 51. After taking my eye test, that I cheated on, I was walking out to the car park to get into the car with my examiner, and another kid was getting ready to pull out. He reversed instead and hit the car behind. More of a love tap, really. I just heard him shout and apologize that he wasn't ready, and could they start over, which his examiner for some reason seemed okay with. However, when pulling out this time, he went forward out of the parking bay, but turned far too early and scratched the car next to him. He was told to stop and get out. Kid failed in less than a minute and didn't fully understand why, since both cars he hit had only minor damage. Story 52. Not the kid, but the examiner. I was taking the exam, but due to a mix-up in the system, there was no one assigned to be my tester. No problem. There was a written exam going on, so the retired 80-plus instructor who oversaw the written exam would do my exam, and my driving instructor did the written test. He anyway needed to be there since the test was performed in his specially equipped car, with pedals on the passenger side to intervene to avoid accidents. So I was expecting an easy exam, just drive around for an hour long and hope he didn't die of old age. Everything went well for the first half an hour, but when we got to a big road, the car kept speeding up after I took my foot off the gas pedal. The gas pedal was stuck. I get sexed the clutch to the floor and remembered the Corey Haim Feldman instructional video, License to Drive, where they fixed this problem by kicking down the gas pedal repeatedly, while calmly telling my examiner that the pedal was stuck. He quickly identified the problem. The stuff he had been using as a footrest were the instructor pedals. After he removed his foot from the gas pedal, the problem was solved, and we both lived. Story 53. I'm not a tester, but when I took my test the first time, I ran into a dumpster on the way out of the parking lot before I even started my test. Was so embarrassed and disappointed with myself that I just cried when I got home. My dad made it worse. On the way home, he told me that he was disappointed in me too. That comment made me even more upset. Story 54. Story from Pennsylvania. We have lots of tractor trailers on the roads here. Lots. Arguably too many, and they can often be terrifying to drive around. Anyways, we could take our license test through the high school, and the teacher often let us ride along on each other's tests to see how it goes. I was in the back seat as the student testing pulls onto the interstate at 35 miles per hour. A tractor trailer comes barreling downhill on us and lays into his horn, and the teacher starts telling at the kid to move with the flow of traffic, aka speed up. He starts going 45 miles per hour and is clearly super nervous. We are going one exit on I-83. It's only 2 lanes each way and no shoulder, as the highway is sandwiched between a large hill and a lake. I don't know how many tractor trailers went screaming by us in those 4 miles, but they kept honking and swerving to avoid us. The instructor is shouting and cursing at the kids to speed up. I thought we were going to die. I'm surprised none of them jackknifed or tipped over, to be honest. Story 55. Not exactly what you were looking for. During my exam years ago, I saw a car at a very high speed cross the 2 lanes on my side of the road at a 45 degrees angle, hop the curb, drive over the median, cut off a bunch of cars on the other side of the road into the ditch, and then was launched into the air about 3 feet. I exclaimed loudly, and the tester hadn't seen a thing happen. Story 56. Not the test, but the required 6 hours with permit driving instructor. I finished my hours. The instructor told me to leave the car running in park and swap seats. I get out of the car and shut the door to find that I have just locked the US both out of the car while running. He then had to break into the car with a hanger. Next day, we did 2 3-hour lessons. He made me drive him to a hardware store to buy a spare key and magnetic box thing. Story 57. My tester told me this story. The kid was driving along when a squirrel ran out on the street in front of her and she freaked out. So the tester told her to just calm down and hit the squirrel. So she did. After it ran up on the sidewalk away from danger, the kid drove up on the sidewalk to hit the poor squirrel. Story 58. The day I went to take my driver's license test after having a restricted for 2 years, a lady was backing up out of her spot. The spot behind her was empty, so that was good. She intended to back up into it, got scared, slammed on the accelerator, and jumped the parking curb and landed on the hood of an unsuspecting Mercedes. Story 59. Reading these stories makes me realize why there are so many bad drivers in Louisiana and why we have the highest insurance rates. All I had to do to get my license was drive 25 miles per hour on a road for like 1 mile max, make 2 right turns, and park normally. No parallel parking, no left turns, literally nothing complicated in the slightest. Story 60. Not a tester, but at my local DMV, I was inside when an old man was there to renew his license. He somehow managed to put it in reverse, hop the curb, and smash through the front window of the DMV. That was a weird day. Story 61. When I was in the Army, I had this driving instructor who was the best, was almost at the age where he could retire. The guy had seen it all. He would tell this story where he was practicing with a guy in an armored tracked vehicle. At one point, they were encountering a roundabout, and he instructed the guy to continue straight ahead, meaning they would pass the roundabout and take the second exit. The guy did exactly that, driving straight through over the roundabout. Couldn't stop laughing when I heard that story. Still gives me a big smile when I think of it. Story 62. It was my great-grandma's funeral the day I took my test. Since it takes months to get testing appointments where I live, my parents had me take the test as planned, and then we would go straight to the funeral. I was a casket bearer, so I wore a full suit to my driver's test in the middle of July. I was hot, miserable, and thinking about a funeral. During the cornerback, I was so distracted by hot, and uncomfortable I was that I missed a cone. I tapped it with my bumper and it tipped over. I'm still not sure why, but I proceeded to continue attempting to park by running over the cone. The instructor asked me, "What if that cone was a child?" To which I responded, "They would be dead." I failed. Story 63. They don't check their mirrors, use their blinkers, and think texting on the phone is not wrong. Fights you about it, then has his mother come up and tell you, owner of a traffic school, that we sold her something else and berated us, insulted us, and told us we failed her son. We taught him everything. Did the driving test in our vehicle as practice. We used to work for the DMV about 20 times. The kid fails before he even leaves park because he didn't check his mirrors or put on a seatbelt, as we've instructed, and started to text on his phone. 24 seconds. A girl once closed her eyes on the highway and sped us off into a ditch because she was scared of speeding vehicles on a highway. Story 64. Not a tester, but I have talked to one, and he told me a story about a 16-year-old guy. During the test, the kid had to slow down because an old lady was crossing the street ahead of them. When he pulled up next to her, he stepped on the brake, pulled the window down, and started screaming. He called her an old hag and started a tirade that was laced with curse words about her not crossing at a traffic light. He did not understand that going out of your way to verbally abuse elderly pedestrians is not okay during the test. Story 65. Not a driver's license tester, but I feel like I'll never get to share this if I don't share it now. I was taking my driver's license test, and the woman who was testing me got mad at me for inching forward so I could see around the corner, and I crap you. She told me to just stop at the line and guess. I failed. Story 66. Had a girl wreck on the interstate when I had a scheduled drive time. She had a semi-merge into her lane, not really her fault. She then proceeds to shout, "Jesus, take the wheel," and let go of the steering wheel. Instructor grabbed onto it for dear life. They ended up rolling the car into a field. Everyone was okay. Luckily, I canceled that one. I asked the instructor the week later why he had a cast on his arm and neck plate. Story 67. At DMV, renewing my license. Listen to tester tell parents why she failed. Not only was she immediately speeding once we left the lot, she was also speeding through a school zone. Story 68. My uncle used to be a tester. Best story I ever heard was he had a student fart from stress while the windows were up and the smell was so bad the student tried to roll down both windows but was panicking so bad he kept hitting the lock-unlock button. My uncle calmly rolled down the window and said, "I think we've tested the locks thoroughly." The student started crying and ran out of the car. Apparently, he crapped his pants. Story 69. Happened to me during my driver's test. Pouring down rain and the lady gets out to check all my lights and turn signals, etc. So when she's done, she finally gets in my truck and we are about to start. For some reason, my car wouldn't shift into reverse and I started to panic and was confused as to how this happened when I just drove it perfectly fine to the DMV. She then proceeded to say, "Did you turn it on?" My git only had it turned into accessory mode for the lights and never turned my truck on. Only missed 2 points and got my license though at least. Story 70. My first time taking my driver's exam. My instructor told me to put the car in reverse and back up as straight and safe as possible. I was almost done with the test, but very nervous. So I put the car in reverse and hit the pedal, was backing up at probably 20 miles per hour and ended up in the middle of the road. I did not pass my test, and my instructor looked mortified. Luckily, some practice and hitting some bushes prepared me to pass a month later. Story 71. My idiotic self drove on the wrong side of the road and instantly failed. The test was given in a closed-off testing area, not the actual street, and the person in front of me was on the wrong side of the road, and I asked the tester if I was supposed to be on that side. He was like, "What do you think?" Me being an idiot thought, well, since this is a self-contained track, I guess I have to be on that side to complete the test. So embarrassing. Story 72. My driver's education teacher said that a student just drove straight into a ditch. When he asked why she did that, she responded by saying that she thought the car would steer itself. She ended up getting her license, so watch out for that one. Story 73. Not a tester, but I always like to share the story about my great-grandfather. He took the driver's test and got his license at 14, legally at 16 and key, but lied and told the DMV, the Navy, and my great-grandmother he was 2 years older than he actually was. Fast forward 70-ish years, he goes to renew his license, and they finally realize he'd lied about his birth date for his original license. They still let him renew but had to change his birth date on all kinds of paperwork. Story 74. I was the passenger during driver's ed. Another kid was driving. Instructor was making small talk, asking how his family was doing. Kid says his dad had a heart attack and died the night before. He didn't even have a reaction and just completed the drive. We got back to his house and he got out. We sat in the driveway for a minute and both started crying. It was pretty bizarre, to say the least. Story 75. I was in the DMV in a retiree town I lived in, and I watched a seriously old woman fail the vision test 100%, and the tester felt bad for her and pushed her application through anyways. It's worth noting that in Az where this happened, your license doesn't expire for some 50 or so years. Story 76. Obligatory this was me. Taking my test, I came to a main road after driving down the back roads. There was a stoplight and a stop sign for whatever reason, and I only noticed the stop sign. I looked both ways and took a left turn onto the main road as instructed. As soon as I came fully into the lane, the instructor failed me for turning on red but complimented the fact I at least checked left and right first. Still embarrassing to this day. Story 77. After my grandmother finished taking her test as a teenager, the test judge, or whatever they are, told her, "Well, you did everything perfectly, but every time I told you to go right, you went left, and when I told you to go left, you went right." She passed anyways. Still doesn't know her left and right, though. And story 78. Not a tester, but my boyfriend told me that he stalled an automatic pulling out of the parking lot to take his driver's test. They should have failed him, but they let him pass because he was otherwise very good. And I 100% believe him because I started dating him right after he got his license. And for about 2 years, he stalled the car pulling out of our driveway every single date. Story 79. My science teacher used to do driving tests. He would bring them to a road nobody else was on and then say, "You don't have to stop at this stop sign. There's no one around." If they didn't stop, he failed them. Story 80. May repeat. On my brother's driving test, he rolled through a red light without even looking at the cross traffic. When the tester asked him what he was doing, he said without blinking, "Right turn on red." To this day, I refuse to let him live that down. Story 81. When I was waiting to take my driving test, I got to hear this conversation between the instructor and the mother of the kid before me instructor. "Ma'am, do you know what the speed limit of Dunkirk is?" Mom, 30. Instructor, "You might want to tell you son that have a nice day." Story 82. My friend just got her license and she drove me around that day. We were at a red and without even thinking about it turned left on the red. I told her and she said that she did not see a sign that said no turn on red. I never rode with her after that. Story 83. I failed my restricted test because, as I was turning into a street, a guy ran a red light and smashed into the back corner of my car. Tester failed me because apparently it was my fault, and I should have seen him. Total B's. Failed my full test because I accidentally sped through some roadworks. Oops.